You've been lied to about memory. You were told that reading more makes you smarter, that taking notes is how you learn, that repetition is the key to remembering. None of that is true. The smartest people in history didn't take notes the way you do. They didn't highlight books. They didn't reread chapters 5 times. And yet they remembered everything that mattered, not because they had better brains, but because they had a completely different system. A system most people have never heard of. A system that has nothing to do with memorization, and everything to do with how you build your mind. Let me show you what I mean. In the late 1800s, a young Serbian engineer named Nikola Tesla was designing machines that didn't exist yet. But here's the strange part. He wasn't drawing them. He wasn't writing anything down. Tesla would sit quietly and build the entire machine inside his mind. Every gear, every wire, every rotation. He would let it run in his head for weeks. He'd mentally rotate the parts in 3 dimensions. He'd spot the flaws before a single piece of metal was ever touched. When he finally built the machine, it worked almost exactly as he'd imagined. Over his lifetime, Tesla filed over 300 patents. Many of them came not from a workshop, but from pure mental rehearsal. Most people thought he was gifted. He wasn't. He had trained a specific skill, the skill of building memories so vivid, so structured, that they became usable tools inside his mind. Now, around the same time in history, there was another mind working in a completely different way, but arriving at the same result. Richard Feynman refused to memorize physics formulas. His colleagues thought this was reckless. How can a physicist not memorize equations? But Feynman had a rule. If he couldn't derive a formula from scratch, he didn't understand it. And if he didn't understand it, memorizing it was useless. So instead of storing formulas in his head, he stored the reasoning, the logic chain, the path that led to the answer. And because he understood the path, he could rebuild any formula from nothing, anytime, anywhere. That's why Feynman could teach quantum physics to a 12-year-old. Not because he simplified it, but because he actually understood it deeply enough to explain it simply. His memory wasn't better than yours. His encoding was. Then there was Marie Curie. Curie won 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. That alone is almost impossible. But what most people don't know is how she organized her thinking. Her lab notebooks, which are still radioactive to this day, weren't just logs of experiments. They were structured like decision trees. Every entry didn't just record what happened. It linked back to the original hypothesis. It connected forward to the next question. It created a chain that her future self could follow. Curie could open her notebook to any page and within minutes reconstruct the entire logic of months of research. She didn't have a better memory than other scientists. She had a better architecture, a system that made retrieval effortless. 3 completely different people. 3 completely different fields, but the same invisible advantage. And it had nothing to do with how much they remembered. It had everything to do with how they structured what went in. Now, let's look at this from the other side. Not from the people who remembered well, but from the scientist who discovered why most people remember wrong. Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how the human mind actually works. And one of his most disturbing findings was this. You don't remember experiences. You remember a distorted version of them. Kahneman found that your brain saves 2 things from any experience. The peak moment, the most intense part, and the ending. Everything else gets compressed, blurred, or thrown away. He called it the peak end rule. And it doesn't just apply to vacations and dentist visits. It applies to everything you read, study, and learn. That article you read this morning, you remember the one sentence that surprised you, and maybe the last paragraph. The rest is already gone. Kahneman didn't just study this in other people, he applied it to himself. He stopped trying to remember entire lectures, entire books, entire conversations. Instead, He focused on encoding the peak, the one idea that shifted his thinking. And that single shift made his retention dramatically better than people who tried to capture everything. Less input, more architecture, same pattern as Tesla, Feynman, and Curie. Then there's Naval Ravikant. Naval is one of the most respected thinkers in Silicon Valley. He built and invested in companies worth billions. But when people ask him how he stays sharp, his answer surprises everyone. He doesn't read more books. He rereads the same books. Naval has said publicly that he would rather read one great book 10 times than 10 new books once. Why? Because the first time you read something, you capture maybe 10%. The second time, you notice things you completely missed. By the fifth time, the ideas start connecting to everything else you know. Naval doesn't chase new information. He deepens his relationship with the information he already has. He once said that he doesn't want to read more. He wants to remember more. 5 people? Now. Tesla. Feynman. Curie. Kahneman. Naval. Different centuries. Different fields. Different methods. But if you've been paying attention, you've probably already guessed it. None of them tried to remember more. They all changed the architecture of how information entered their mind. Tesla built spatial structures. Feynman stored reasoning paths instead of facts. Curie created external retrieval systems. Kahneman encoded only the peaks. Naval deepened instead of widened. The principle is this: memory is not a storage problem. It's an architecture problem. The difference between someone who forgets everything they read and someone who compounds knowledge for decades is not talent. Not IQ, not discipline. It's retrieval architecture, how you structure, what goes in. So it's actually there when you need it out. Your brain doesn't save everything. It saves what's structured to be found again, and it quietly deletes the rest. Now here's where this becomes personal. You are consuming more information right now than any human generation in history. More articles, more podcasts, more videos, more threads, more books, and yet your retention rate is probably lower than a farmer in 1850 who read 1 book a year. That farmer remembered what he read because he had time to think about it, to connect it, to use it. You don't have that luxury. You read something brilliant at 8 a.m., and by noon, it's buried under 40 other inputs. And here's the real danger. In the age of AI, access to information is no longer an advantage. Anyone can find anything in seconds. The bottleneck has shifted. It's no longer about finding knowledge, it's about holding it long enough to connect it. If you can't retrieve what you've learned, AI replaces you. You become the person who Googles the same thing every week, who rereads the same article because nothing stuck the first time, who collects information but never compounds it. But if you can retrieve what you've learned quickly, reliably, in the moment you need it, then AI doesn't replace you. It amplifies you, because you become the person who connects ideas across domains, who sees patterns others miss, who thinks instead of just searching. The question is not whether you're smart enough. The question is whether your system is built for retrieval. So, how do you actually build this? Not in theory, not as a nice idea, but as a system you can start using this week. Here's what the best minds in history did, broken down into 5 principles you can steal. The first one changes everything. Most people try to remember things by repeating them. Read it again, highlight it again, write it again. But Kahneman's research showed something counterintuitive. Your brain doesn't remember what's repeated. It remembers what's tense. Tension means a moment of difficulty, a question you couldn't answer, a gap between what you expected and what actually happened. That's what the peak end rule is really about. Your brain flags the moments that made you struggle and throws away the rest. So instead of highlighting 20 lines in a chapter, try this. After you finish reading, close the book. Ask yourself one hard question about what you just read, not a summary. A question you're not sure you can answer. That single moment of tension does more for your memory than reading the chapter 3 times. The struggle is the signal, and your brain pays attention to signals, not repetition. Now, the second principle. Richard Feynman became one of the greatest teachers in the history of science. Not because he studied teaching, but because he had a rule. If you can't explain it, simply, you don't understand it. Most people wait until they feel ready before they try to teach something. Feynman did the opposite. He would explain a concept before he fully understood it, and the places where he stumbled, those became his targets. This is now known as the Feynman technique, and it's one of the most effective memory tools ever discovered. Here's how you use it. Within 24 hours of learning something, explain it out loud, to a friend, to a voice memo, to an empty room. Don't read from your notes. Don't check your highlights. Just talk. The places where you freeze, where you say, where you wave your hands and skip ahead, those are the gaps. Go back and fill only those. You don't need to review everything. You only need to find and fix the holes. Teaching isn't something you do after you remember. Teaching is how you remember. The third principle comes from a discovery made in 1885 by a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus wanted to know exactly how fast people forget, so he memorized hundreds of nonsense syllables and tracked how quickly they faded. What he found is now called the forgetting curve. Within 1 hour, you lose more than half of what you learned. Within 1 day, you've lost roughly 70%. Within a week, almost everything is gone. But here's the breakthrough. If you try to recall something at specific intervals after 1 day, then 1 week, then 1 month, the forgetting curve flattens. Each recall makes the memory stronger and longer lasting. This is spaced retrieval. And it's exactly what Naval Ravikant does when he rereads the same book 5 times over 5 years instead of reading 5 new books. But here's the key most people miss. The retrieval has to be active, not passive. Don't reread your notes. Try to recall them from memory first, then check. The effort of pulling something back from the edge of forgetting is what makes it stick. Rereading feels productive, but recall is what actually works. The fourth principle is something Marie Curie understood 100 years before anyone gave it a name. Your memory is limited, but your system doesn't have to be. Curie's notebooks weren't just records. They were an external architecture, a structure that let her future self retrieve any idea without having to remember it perfectly. Today, we'd call this a second brain, but you don't need a fancy app to build one. Here's the simplest version that actually works. Every time you learn something worth keeping, write it down. But don't just write the idea. Link it to one thing you already know. One connection. That's all it takes. Because isolated ideas fade, but connected ideas form a web, and webs hold. A single new idea linked to an existing one is worth more than 10 ideas sitting alone in a notebook you'll never open again. Don't build a library. Build a map. The fifth principle comes from Tesla, and it's the one most people will resist. Before you write about something, before you speak about it, before you try to explain it, close your eyes and see it. Tesla didn't just think in words, he thought in pictures. He could build entire machines in his mind because he had trained himself to visualize with extreme detail. You don't need to be Tesla, but you can use a lighter version of his method. After learning a new concept, spend 30 seconds building a mental image of it, not a vague feeling, an actual picture. If you're learning about compound interest, picture a snowball rolling downhill, growing larger with every rotation. If you're learning about feedback loops, picture a microphone pointed at a speaker, the sound getting louder each cycle. The more vivid the picture, the stronger the memory. Because your brain evolved to remember images, places, and spatial relationships, not text on a screen. If you can see it, you'll remember it. If you can only describe it, you'll probably forget it. So let's step back. 5 principles. Encode with tension, not repetition. Teach before you're ready. Space the retrieval, not the input. Build external scaffolding. Visualize before you verbalize. None of them require a higher IQ. None of them require more time. None of them require expensive tools or apps. They just require a different architecture. And that's the thing most people never realize. The gap between someone who reads 50 books a year and remembers nothing, and someone who reads 12 books and compounds knowledge for a lifetime is not effort. It's not even discipline. It's the system underneath. Tesla didn't have a supernatural brain. He had a spatial filing system inside his mind that most people never bother to build. Feynman didn't have photographic memory. He had a habit of testing his own understanding before it felt comfortable. Curie didn't have more hours in the day. She had a notebook architecture that turned scattered experiments into retrievable chains of logic. Kahneman didn't try to remember everything. He learned to encode only what mattered, the peaks, the turning points, the moments of tension. Naval didn't read more than everyone else. He read deeper, and depth is what creates retention. The pattern is always the same. Less input, better structure, easier. Retrieval. Most people are building libraries with no index, shelves full of books they've read but can't recall, folders full of notes they'll never open again, highlights that disappear the moment they close the app. They don't have a memory problem, they have an architecture problem. And in a world where AI can access any piece of information in seconds, the only advantage left is not what you can find, it's what you can hold, what you can connect, what you can retrieve in the moment it matters, without searching, without Googling, without asking a machine. That's not a skill, that's an identity. You either become the person who collects information or the person who compounds it. The first person is replaceable. The second one is not. So the question isn't whether you're reading enough, or studying enough, or consuming enough. The question is simpler than that. When was the last time you remembered something that actually changed how you think? Not something you bookmarked, not something you highlighted. Something you can recall right now, in this moment, without checking anything. If you can't answer that, the problem isn't your brain, it's your system. A mind without retrieval architecture is just expensive storage.